It is late October 1940. Europe is under the Nazi jackboot. The world watches, expecting the next logical, devastating strike. And in Rome, Benito Mussolini, pacing in his office, makes a decision not of strategic necessity, but of pure, frustrated ego. He gives the order to invade Greece. This is often remembered as a comic prelude to the main event of World War II, a farcical stumble by an incompetent military. But that simplification is dangerously misleading. The Greco-Italian War was not just a failure. It was a seismic event that cracked the foundation of the Axis, irrevocably altered the strategic map of Europe, and demonstrated with brutal clarity how the arrogance of a single man can be more destructive than any army. It is a case study in how a secondary theatre can become a primary catastrophe. The real story isn't that Italy failed to win quickly. The real story is that Greece succeeded, against every conceivable odd, in breaking the offensive will of a modern industrialized state. And in doing so, they drew the wolves of the German Wehrmacht south, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately consume them, but would also fatally disperse Axis forces at a critical moment in history. This is a war decided by mountain passes, winter mud, forgotten logistics, and the profound miscalculation of an opponent's national will. Mussolini's decision was born from a place of political, not military, necessity. He watched Hitler annex territories without consulting him, and grew obsessed with securing what he called una guerra parallela, a parallel war where Italy would carve its own empire, independent of German influence. Greece, he believed, was the perfect target, weak, politically divided and isolated. The Italian war plan, codenamed Emergenza G, reflected this hubris. It was not the product of detailed staff work, but a rushed improvisation. The objective was not a methodical conquest, but a swift, spectacular entry into Athens, a blitzkrieg of Mediterranean style. The forces allocated, initially just 2 army corps from the occupying forces in Albania, were insufficient for a sustained campaign, especially given the terrain they would face. Intelligence was contemptuous, dismissing the Greek army as feeble and the nation as ripe for collapse. There was no provision for a winter war. The Italian High Command, rife with personal rivalries and sycophancy, failed to question the fundamental premise. They were preparing for a parade, not a fight. This was the first critical failure, the confusion of political desire with military reality. For any student of conflict, it stands as a timeless lesson. When the objective is prestige rather than a concrete strategic gain, the planning will invariably neglect the unforgiving variables of weather, terrain, and an enemy's capacity to resist. The Italian offensive launched on October 28, 1940. It pushed across the Albanian-Greek frontier into the rugged Pindus Mountains and towards the coastal plains of Epirus. And it immediately stalled. The concept of manoeuvre, so vital to modern warfare, died in those passes. Narrow, winding tracks, often little more than goat paths, channeled Italian forces into perfect killing zones for Greek artillery and determined infantry. There were no flanks to turn. The battle was reduced to a brutal head-on struggle for height and observation. Then came the rain. The autumn of 1940 was one of the wettest on record. What passes existed dissolved into quagmires. The Regio Esercito, for all its modern pretensions, was still heavily reliant on animal transport and marching infantry. Its logistical tail, inadequate from the start, snapped. Men at the front went without winter clothing, without hot food, and critically without sufficient ammunition. Tanks and trucks were useless, immobilized in sucking clay. Meanwhile, the Greek commander, General Alexandros Papagos, made a courageous and decisive choice. Ignoring the initial panic in Athens, he committed his reserves not to a passive defense, but to a methodical counter-offensive. He understood that in this terrain, the defender held the advantage, but only if they seized the initiative. Greek soldiers, many of the mountain troops from these very regions, adapted seamlessly. They operated in small, agile units, using the landscape for infiltration and ambush. The Italian army, demoralized, cold and stranded, began a retreat that turned into a rout. By mid-November, not only was the invasion stopped, but the Greeks were advancing into Albanian territory, capturing strategic heights and inflicting humiliating losses. The lesson here is elemental. Geography is not just a backdrop. It is an active, decisive participant. The Italian failure to respect it was a failure of command, as fundamental as any tactical blunder. The Greek advance into Albania from late November 1940 through the spring of 1941 is, I think, the most overlooked phase of the war. It was a grueling, static and horrifically costly struggle in the mountains, a miniature version, really, of the Western Front in World War I. But you know, its significance is profound. The Greek army, with minimal industrial base and no substantial allies yet, had not only defended its homeland, but had actually taken the fight into the invaders' territory. They captured key towns like Korcha and Agioi Saranda. More importantly, though, they shattered the offensive spirit of the Italian army. Mussolini's frantic reinforcements, eventually totaling over 500,000 men, poured into the Albanian ports, but they were fed piecemeal into a meat grinder of attrition. The Italian logistical system was in perpetual crisis. The survival reality for the common soldier on both sides was defined by frostbite, trench foot, and constant shelling in rocky, exposed positions. This was not a war of sweeping tank battles. It was a war of mule trains, of outpost raids in blinding fog, of holding a frozen ridge, because its map coordinate held strategic value. The Italian military's deep-seated problems, poor junior leadership, a lack of NCO initiative, equipment deficiencies and a toxic divide between frontline troops and a comfortable distant officer corps were all exposed and exacerbated by the Greek resistance. For the survivalist-minded, this period underscores a brutal truth. Morale and mental endurance are resources as tangible as bullets or fuel. The Italian army's supply of both was exhausted long before its material reserves. The stalemate in Albania created a strategic crisis for the Axis that resonated far beyond the Balkans. First, it forced Hitler's hand. The Führer could not tolerate a British ally, which Greece became in March 1941 on his southern flank as he prepared for his monumental invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, the defining gamble of the war in the East, was delayed by critical weeks to allow for the German invasion of Greece and Yugoslavia, the now necessary Operation Marita. This delay is often cited as a factor in the German failure to take Moscow before the Russian winter. The Greco-Italian War, therefore, acted as a strategic diversion of immense consequence. Second, the need for German intervention permanently ended Mussolini's dream of a parallel war, reducing Italy to a clearly subordinate partner. It revealed the weakness at the heart of the Axis to the watching world, particularly to neutral nations. Finally, the German invasion of Greece in April 1941, while swiftly successful, created another consequence: the costly airborne invasion of Crete The near disaster for the German Fallschirmjäger at Crete led the German High Command to largely abandon large-scale airborne operations for the rest of the war. A doctrinal shift born from a conflict Italy started on a whim. We remember the Greco-Italian War, not for glorious victories, but for sobering truths. It demonstrates that national will, when fused with competent adaptive leadership and a mastery of terrain, can defy the crude calculus of military power. It is a masterclass in how not to plan a war, highlighting the fatal disconnect between political vanity and military logistics. And it stands as a stark reminder that in the interconnected chaos of global conflict, there are no sideshows. A struggle in remote mountain passes can bend the trajectory of empires and send reverberations thousands of miles away to the gates of Moscow. These are the lessons that lie beneath the surface of the grand narratives, and they are precisely the kind of insights that matter for understanding the real, grinding nature of history, survival, and power. If you value this depth of analysis, this focus on cause, consequence, and often overlooked context, then you belong here. Subscribe to War Machina and share this video with others who believe history is more than just dates and drama. Thanks for watching.